Okay, so let's just jump right in. What if I told you that an animal that's been extinct for 13,000 years is, well, back? This is an absolutely incredible and super controversial story. So there's this biotech company, Colossal Biosciences, and they just made a wild announcement. They're claiming they've successfully brought back the legendary dire wolf. And yes, when I say dire wolf, I mean the dire wolf, the fearsome predator that basically became a superstar on Game of Thrones. But almost as soon as the news broke, the scientific community started raising its hand and saying, hold on a second, is this a real deal resurrection or is it something else? So what's the real story here? Let's get into it. All right, so first up, let's look at Colossal's big reveal. I mean, we're not talking about a result in a petri dish here. We are talking about the actual live birth of 3 pups, 3 seemingly impossible pups, now living in a world their kind hasn't seen for thousands of years. You have to understand, Colossal Biosciences has this, well, colossal goal. They want to literally reverse extinction. They're looking at the big names, the woolly mammoth, the dodo bird, you name it. But the dire wolf is their first big win. And they've named the pups 2 boys, Romulus and Remus, and a girl, Khaleesi. And here's the crazy part. They're alive right now, tucked away in some top secret preserve here in the States. Okay, so before we can even debate if they really brought it back, we have to ask a more basic question. What even was a dire wolf? Because it turns out pretty much everything we thought we knew for the last century was wrong. Yeah, for more than 100 years, the thinking was simple. Dire wolves are just gray wolves on steroids, right? Bigger, meaner. But then, bam, a huge study in 2021 just blew that whole idea out of the water. It turns out, they're not even close cousins. Their family trees split apart almost 6 million years ago. That's a huge deal.
And it's not just about size, though, yeah, they were about 25% bigger with a massive head and a bone-crushing bite. No, the real kicker is this. They lived in the same places as gray wolves for thousands of years, and they never, ever interbred. They were a totally different species, a whole other branch on the dog family tree.
So this all begs a question, right? How in the world do you even try to bring an extinct animal back to life? It feels like something straight out of a movie, but the science is very real. And today, there are basically 3 ways scientists are trying to pull it off. First up, you've got something called backbreeding. Think of it like trying to bake your great-grandmother's secret cake recipe, but you only have modern ingredients from the supermarket. You take animals that are alive today, the living relatives, and you selectively breed them generation after generation to bring out those old ancestral traits. There's actually a project doing this right now in South Africa. It's called the quagga project. The quagga was this cool-looking relative of the zebra that was only striped on its front half. So since 1987, they've been breeding zebras to have fewer and fewer stripes. And honestly, they look almost exactly like the original. But this brings up a huge philosophical question. If it looks the part, but the genes aren't the same, is it really the same animal? Okay, so backbreeding gets you a lookalike. But what if you want an exact copy? Well, that's where cloning comes in. This is the sci-fi dream, right? A perfect genetic duplicate. But, and this is a huge but, you need a perfectly preserved cell to start with. And even if you find one, the whole process is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And if you want a cautionary tale, just look at the tragic story of the bucardo, a type of Spanish goat. The very last one died in 2000, but scientists had her cells. So in 2003, they did it. They cloned a baby bucardo. The species was back. For about 10 minutes, the clone had a fatal lung defect and died almost immediately. It is the only animal in history to go extinct twice. It's just heartbreaking, and it shows you how fragile this all is. Which brings us to method number 3, the one Colossal is using, genetic engineering. Now, this isn't backbreeding or cloning. It's more like being a genetic surgeon. You take the DNA from an ancient fossil, you pinpoint the exact genes that made it unique, and then you use this incredible tool called CRISPR to go into the DNA of a living relative, like a gray wolf, and literally edit it to match. So that's the theory. But how did Colossal actually do it? What was their step-by-step recipe for cooking up a dire wolf? Well, it was a pretty wild journey that started with digging up clues from the distant past. Okay, let's break this recipe down. Step 1, get your ancient DNA. They managed to pull some from a 13,000-year-old tooth and an even older skull. Step 2,
They compared it to a modern gray wolf and found it was a 99.5% match. Pretty close. So they used the gray wolf genome as their template. Now here's the key. They didn't try to change the whole thing. They just targeted 14 specific genes that control things like size, head shape, fur, the visible stuff. They made 20 little edits with CRISPR, used those cells to make embryos, and implanted them into surrogate mothers, which were actually domestic dogs. And then eventually, the pups were born. And boom. After all that mind-blowing science, you have these pups. But this is where we get to the real heart of the debate, the question that's causing all the controversy. Is what they made really a dire wolf? You hear that 99.5% number and you think, wow, that's practically identical. But hold on, let's put that in perspective. You and I, we share about 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Are we chimps? No way. That tiny-sounding percentage difference is actually millions of years of separate evolution. It's a huge, huge chasm. And this is exactly what the critics are latching onto. They say, look, you changed 14 genes. Do you know how many genes are in a wolf's genome? Millions. The changes they made account for something like 0.0001% of the total DNA. So what you have, genetically speaking, is a gray wolf that's been cosmetically edited to look like a dire wolf. And here's the killer analogy that really drives the point home. Let's go back to the chimp. If you took a chimp and you used CRISPR to change 14 genes to give it, less body hair and a slightly different face shape, would you call it a human? Absolutely not. You'd call it a genetically modified chimp. And that, critics say, is what we have here. It's an amazing scientific achievement for sure. It's an engineered gray wolf. But it's not a resurrected dire wolf. So, okay. Whether it's a real dire wolf or not, the whole project forces us to have a much bigger and maybe more important conversation about the why. Why are we even doing this? Is de-extinction really the best use of all this brain power and all this money? I mean, the debate here is really fascinating. The pro side says, hey, we could bring back important animals that once held entire ecosystems together. But the against side has some pretty tough questions. Like, where would you even put a dire wolf today? The world it lived in is gone. The giant sloths it hunted are gone. And that leads to the really uncomfortable question. Is this about conservation, or is it about creating a living spectacle, a showpiece for people to gawk at? And while we're having this debate about resurrecting the past, let's talk about the present. Look at this number. 2. That's it. That's the total population of northern white rhinos left on Earth. Both are female. When they die, that's it. Game over for an entire species. And that's happening right now, on our watch. And they're not alone. A UN report recently came out with a number that's it's hard to even wrap your head around. 1 million. 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction because of human activity. And the thing is, we still have a chance to save so many of them, with good old-fashioned conservation. So that's really what it all boils down to, isn't it? The science of de-extinction is undeniably brilliant and fascinating. But it also puts a huge choice right in front of us. With over 1 million species hanging by a thread, where do we put our energy, our resources, our hope? Do we focus on bringing back the ghosts of the past, or do we fight like hell to save the incredible living world we still have?